There she is. All right, let's get you unmuted.
Yes,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, we're all
Yeah.
set. I'm going to just introduce you and then you take it from there. We'll see what questions come up. I have a few myself.
Okay.
You ready? All right.
Yes.
Just once again, welcome to Joyspring Online Family Festival. We have Akilah Richards with us today, sharing her expertise on how to start a podcast. Akilah S. Richards hosts Fare of the Free Child, a lifestyle and parenting podcast about the connection between liberation, learning, and parenting, particularly among BIPOC communities. Parents, educators, unschoolers, and entrepreneurs tune in weekly to connect about unschooling, deschooling, conscious parenting, and self-directedness. We talk about emotional wellness, learning, and children, parenting, self-care, and self-love. Akilah is passionate about mindful partnerships and parenting. Her voice and work have been featured on NPR, NBC TV, Good Morning America's blog, and in several magazines, including Essence and Real Simple. She is a celebrated TEDx speaker, an accomplished digital content writer, and sought-after facilitator whose book, Raising Free People, will be released in August of this year. I cannot wait for that, and I am honored to have Akilah S. Richards with us today. Welcome and
Thank you. Thank you too. Peace, everybody. I'm so glad that you're doing what you are doing. This is so necessary. We've been in conversation for so long. You know, I know this is something you've been really working and been really agile about trying to figure out how to make it happen. So when you sent the email, I was like, bet, I'll do all the things. So I'm really grateful to be here. And it's just a short session. I think it's 15 minutes, but I'm happy to answer questions because I know that for me, a podcast has been a way that I can do something about the feelings and the sense of responsibilities that come with, being alive in the time that we're in. On one side of the coin, we can say there's always an interesting time to be alive. But right now in particular, as the layers of oppression and anti-Black racism and systemic racism and the myth of white supremacy, all of those layers make a simple thing like being able to feel like you have a voice and being able to create community and being able to organize at whatever level you can or are called to. For me, a podcast has been an avenue for that. And it's been so important for me to not need to rely on much of anything else to get my voice out there and to build community, which is why I'm excited to talk with anybody about that, because it's not free because you still need internet access, or you can use other apps, which we'll talk about, like Anchor, that you can use directly from your phone. But I think that a podcast for me has been part of my liberation work. And I know for some other folks too, a podcast is one of the avenues. So of course, if there are any questions, there's a chat here, or there's a hand raise feature, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. But if there are no specific questions, I can always start with just like generally what the general steps are. If that's useful for folks, let me know. Okay. So the route that I went was to use Libsyn, right? Libsyn, Libsyn.com, which is one of a lot of people call it sort of like the granddaddy of podcast hosting. And if, Deanna, I think you're the host, if you can mute everybody for me so there's no background audio, and feel free to unmute yourselves with any questions. I used Libsyn because it was simple and is simple. And when you log into Libsyn, it's really simple. It tells you what the steps are that you need. Or if you Google in this day and time how to start a podcast, Pat Flynn, Flynn, he has a whole, sort of digital content empire that is focused on podcast and different things that you can do with a podcast. including monetizing a podcast so that it's not more labor that you're doing without compensation. Oftentimes that is the case with a podcast, but depending on your goal for it, like for me, the Fear of the Free Child was not monetized by any stretch of the imagination for up until very recently. But what it offered me was a different currency that money cannot and still cannot buy, which then segued into other opportunities for my work to be shared on broader platforms and natural collaboration. So I do want you to think about that too. Don't think about it from this like martyrdom space. I'm going to start this podcast and suffer through it. Not necessarily. There's lots of resources out there to be strategic. So I went on Libsyn and it said, you know, do you have recorded audio? Do you have an image that represents it? It tells you the size of the image that you could use, and you can record on your phone. I don't have an iPhone. This is I don't even know what the hell this is. Samsung. An Android phone, and it comes with a voice memo app. You could just use that. You could use anchor.fm, which is another service. But what I did was I just recorded, I think just on my phone, and then uploaded it to my computer. And there's this program called Audacity, and I'm gonna drop it in the chat. It's a program that's free that you can download for Mac. Is there a different one for PC? I'm not sure because I use a MacBook, but I'm sure there is. So you can just use that and it'll allow you to do really basic editing, like just clearing out background noise. There's an app that's free for the first few hours. I'll put that in the chat too. It's called Auphonic. It's online. You can just drop your audio in there, like upload it to it like a regular file, and it will do some of the stabilization of standard podcast formatting for you. You know, like making the voice a little bit more even and suppressing the background noises just a little bit. So you can always get decent audio together. And I also encourage you to remember that if you're called to share your voice, don't worry about the audio being perfect. My first probably 50 episodes are horrid in terms of the audio quality, but the content reached, and it was useful for me. That podcast was and still is for me. And that didn't matter. People were able to, human beings can feel past those things, and whoever's judging you because you're not at the standard of megahertz, I don't know if we could curse on this thing, but bleep them. So just move on. So so audio you can capture easily. You can use something like Zoom or Skype to record if you want to talk to someone else. You know, if you and Freddie want to get on a chat and just like talk for 30 minutes, you can do that, you know, through Skype or Zoom. Also, what I do sometimes, like when I have folks in other countries or like Wi-Fi is an issue, or not Wi-Fi, but direct contact, like using Zoom or Skype, we use WhatsApp. They send a voice memo, I send a voice memo. And then I can just go to WhatsApp right from my computer, web.whatsapp.com, and just pull the audio directly onto my desktop right there so that I can upload it to Libsyn or wherever. So that's, you know, you just gotta be really clear about what your intention is. And if your intention isn't to do an NPR featured podcast, then you'll find that a lot of the, you know, feelings of barriers are really just like our schoolishness. It's really just the idea that it needs to be perfect before we do it, which is not true at all. Once you upload it to a service like Libsyn, there's another one called Buzzsprout, and I'm actually on both because now I have multiple podcasts, and they're good for different things and really relatively inexpensive, less than $10 a month for both of them. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure. And you can choose the amount of bandwidth that you need. You know, if you're doing 20 minutes a week, then you don't really need much, versus if you're doing an hour a couple times a week or something like that. But that's really it. You Buzzsprout or Libsyn or Anchor, and they'll tell you exactly what you need to do to upload it. It'll give you a process for getting the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you've ever wondered how is somebody's podcast on Spotify? How do I get mine on there? Those places, yes, Scott, Buzzsprout, all one word though. So let me put that one there. Buzzsprout and then I'll put Libsyn, and then there's Anchor.fm. And I imagine that there are others as well. You can also do a podcast through Patreon. You know, I'm on Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com, I have colleagues and friends like Dr. Sunjata, who his podcast is solely through Patreon. And you can make it minimal barrier to entry, where somebody just comes in for $1 a month and they can listen to your podcast. So what's great about Patreon is that you just upload the file and that's it. It won't be on Apple and those, you know, Apple Podcasts and those places through that though, but you can directly to your patrons and it'll email them every time you put a new one out, which is great. So you really right now have a lot of options for the ways that you can podcast and get your message out to people. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much the overall thing, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions if folks have them.
I'm sure other questions might come up, but while we wait, and maybe this will help also people tuning in at a later time, what was the biggest mistake or learning curve getting started that you think, you know, we can learn from?
I think one of them is what I mentioned before, the schoolishness, like the tendency to be super self-critical or to have this idea of how much you should be producing or the outcome that you should be able to realize in a certain amount of time, or comparing yourself to standard podcasts and things like that. That was really, it allowed for a practice for that, for me to really see some ways that my schoolishness was still kicking in. And I was like, oh, or just a sense of comparison, you know, that constant sense of comparison. So I would say when those feelings come up, try not to immediately honor them and go after them, challenge them. Do I need this to be better? Can you hear me clearly? Is it okay if I'm doing a solo cast by myself? So, you know, am I feeling like people need more? Is that what this is supposed to be about? What is this actually about? And what's the simplest way that I can commit to it? Just being in that practice has really been the biggest learning curve. And then eventually working with other people, because I was so used to just like building everything by myself and climbing the mountains by myself. When I started to get patrons and support, I was still like, I'm scared that they might not know what I'm saying here, and you know, and I was still trying to, it's like it took me a while to be like, you have help. Other people are committed to the work in their own way. Like we can collaborate. It doesn't, you know, like evolving the vision to really make sure that it is inclusive and not so much this thing that you're protecting and trying to get right, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that is good advice across across the board in life.
It shows up everywhere. Yeah.
I'm aware of time. I think we just need to wrap it up. I invite those of you who've tuned in, if you've got a burning question, we've got this amazing well of wisdom as a resource here right now.
And you can always shoot me an email. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. She at AkilahSRichards.com. And it may, odds are, I'll probably just send you a link to somewhere where they answer the question a lot more deeply.
We've got Kiki Delight with her hand raised. Please, I've unmuted you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. I had a question about having multiple people on a podcast. We recorded our first session on Saturday, but one of the things that I was running into was that we kind of overtalked each other a little bit, but it wasn't really more so the conversation that was the issue. It was the quality of like we did it through Zoom, and it would like kind of mess up the more we talked. I guess if two people talk at one time, it like makes like weird funny sounds and stuff.
Sometimes, yeah.
So how do you kind of overcome like little things like that when you're
Yeah.
actually
Well, one
recording.
of it was just practice, that as the person hosting the podcast, you develop the practice over time of recognizing. For me, for example, I'll get like so hyped and be like, yeah, and the call and response, Black folks, I'm like in talking. And eventually when I got editing support, he's like, that's really hard to edit. And we had to figure out how to work that out, because I'm like, well, we're Black, we call and response folks. So what I'm not going to do is just be like, while the person is talking. But I could not be like, girl, yeah, like I could calm down how much I did it, or I could mute myself, or, Zoom has a setting where you can, when you export the finished audio, each person's audio is on a separate track. And Kiki, I don't know if you exported it that way, or if you just exported it all as one. Because did you export it all as one, or was each person on their own audio?
It did it by itself. So when I ended the Zoom call, it just automatically went to saving it. So it saved it as a whole.
It saved it as one. Okay, so there's a setting in Zoom, and I would just Google that, separate track audio in Zoom, and it'll tell you how to do it. I don't remember it off the top, but it's a very simple setting. That's going to help you out quite a bit, because then when you're in post-production, you'll have each track separately, so that you can separate where you need to. Also, something that I was really happy to find out is that going on like upwork.com, upwork.com, or other places, now you can just maybe post it on your social media looking for an editor, like a basic audio editor. When I started working with Juan, who now does all the audio management for our whole network, it was, and yes, I will repeat it, it was like $20 for my hour-long episodes, and that meant a lot to me, because I couldn't work with him every time, but there were some episodes that I could work with him on, and I would try to make those the ones that were with other people. And so let's see, Sharon was asking about repeating. Now I forgot what you were asking me to repeat. For Zoom, for getting the separate tracks. You can put it in the chat if you can.
Is it okay to go over a little to answer that question, or
right quick?
like,
I have a couple more minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
It was the editing. It was the editing thing that you mentioned.
Upwork. Let me put that on there. Yeah.
Okay.
And Kiki, yeah. So I want to make sure too that so that's one thing. So make sure you look for the, just Google that so that it automatically exports as separate tracks. Also consider working with an editor, because that's a skill that a lot of people have. That's mad easy for them, that they can do it inexpensively. And also just your own practice, as if you're hosting the podcast, to hold that space, to keep some of your thoughts in, to recognize the time that you tend to do, like what we do in person-to-person conversation. On a podcast, it's different. So you will need to hold a thought. I have put a notebook down when I'm doing episodes so I can jot it down, because otherwise I'm gonna be like, oh my God, girl, yes. And just like break out, or, letting someone else finish a thought at the risk of me losing my perfect point, because it's gonna sound better on the back end, so it's practice and those few things as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you to those of you who attended, and I think you gave us a lot of resources to follow up on, and this was really great. Thank you for taking time for all of us and for everyone who is going to tune in later.
Good. You're so welcome.
Ask a quick question.
Super fast, yes.
If there was a specific outlet that you were advertising your podcast to start?
Oh, yes. No, there wasn't. It was just connection. The content resonates. When the content resonates, then people will share it because they want that too. And so like the avenues for advertising, that stuff came just really over the past year. And I've been doing the podcast since 2016. I also would look up, again, though, people like Pat Flynn, if you're looking for a more strategic route to lay things out. Yeah, Pat Flynn, and also She Podcasts is a community that I enjoy, with Elsie and Jessica. So yeah, they talk a lot about like marketing and blah, blah. That's not really my space.
All right, thank you. I'm aware of your time. We went over. Thank you for being so generous, and
You're welcome.
For all that you put out for people, for listeners. All
You're
right,
welcome.
thank you, everybody.
You're welcome, everybody. Peace. Be well.
Peace. Be well.